and we are now recording. And Florian, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. It's 3:35 in the afternoon over there, and 70 degrees Fahrenheit outside, I understand. Yeah,
Something like that, yeah.
yeah, winter's about to hit over there, and we are just waking up. So, and we are just very honored to have you. And I wanted to give Gina Urias Sandoval an opportunity to say something, and then we can continue.
The pressure.
The pressure, I wasn't prepared. Florian, I just want to say that this group of students is about a year into their executive MBA program. Mm-hmm. This is the time, this is the exact time actually, where we as a group, along with Dr. Montoya, would be traveling outside of our country somewhere to experience the business practices of a or maybe a couple of countries. So you can imagine that it was a little disappointing for this group to not have the opportunity to travel. We're really excited. As you can tell, New Mexico is kind of tucked away in this part of the southwest of our country. And for us to have the opportunity to travel abroad was just something that we were really looking forward to. Dr. Montoya did a wonderful job of thinking through all of the pieces that we would need to have to get not just through the semester in his course, which is the Global Business Environments course, which he is very much an expert on, but also thinking through the needs of our students. So their backgrounds, what their interests are, what industry they come from, because it's such a variety of industry, and the diversity of industry in this executive MBA is recognized across the world throughout EMBA programs. And so I really wanted to say that because they're a very diverse group. And I just want to thank you for having us, and thank you for taking the time. We're excited. We actually showed up. I think this is really good. I'm looking at the numbers and I'm thinking this is awesome, because I know a lot of people have work and family commitments, and it was going to be hard for them to jump on today. So again, thank you so much. We hope to continue the relationship as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, I should rather say. Yeah, thanks for getting up so early in the morning. It must be a bit harder for you than for me right now. Yeah, 3 p.m. here, so it's not that challenging for me. Yeah, and thanks for being open-minded and wanted to hear what's going on in other countries, even though you can't travel physically yourselves. Yeah. Thanks so much for the introduction. My name is Florian Marcus. You can call me Florian. And I am not Estonian. I'm a German who moved to Estonia 5 years ago. And one of the reasons why I stayed after completing my second master's in Estonia was digitalization. Because it really changes the quality of life. In my 5 years here, I have literally never been to a government authority. I have never set foot in an government office in Estonia. And you don't actually spend that much time in those offices when you think about it. Yes, you might have to queue when you go there, but you don't go there, I don't know, once a week. So it's more of a stress factor than perhaps an economic or a time factor, really. But then you also have to declare your taxes on paper in other countries, and such as also in my native Germany. And you have to have a tax advisor who knows all the right loopholes for you. And in Estonia, you pay your taxes online. It takes 3 minutes. Everything is pre-calculated, and you just click submit. So this is digitalization in its essence. It is not about mirroring an offline service that you have a PDF where you can submit the same data that you would submit on paper, but it's about reinventing entire service journeys and improving the service quality to a degree where there is no more human-computer interaction needed, where perhaps one day you only interact with your voice assistant, you say, I'm pregnant, and then the sort of digital service journey starts sending you your maternity leave benefits for the next 1.5 years, and it starts generating an ID card for your kid and so on. So there are so many things that you can do with digitalization that go beyond what we believe is possible today. And we want to talk about all of that over the next 1.5 hours. So I will try not to let you fall asleep. If you have any questions in general, I suggest you just put it in the chat, and I try to respond to them immediately or ASAP at least. And I think we can get started. we do usually, I'm going to start sharing my screen already. We do usually have a presentation that you can find under e-Estonia.com. When you click on Toolkit here, then you will find the presentation slideshow in English, German, Japanese, French, and Spanish, depending on which language skills you want to test today. There's lots and lots of information in there. So if you want to find out more about a particular topic, either download the presentation or check out the fact sheets and Q&As about e-health, education, online voting, justice, and so on. We're going to talk about that over the next few minutes and 1.5 hours. What I want to start with is this portal. This is eesti.ee, it's estonia.ee, and it is the state portal where you can use 99% of government services online. The only things that you cannot do online in Estonia, in terms of government services, is to get married, and if it doesn't go so well, to get divorced. Apart from that, you can do every single thing. You can register your pet online. You can buy a house online. I can sell you my car online, and you can renew your fishing permit online. Whatever you can think of that is a state service, you can do it online in Estonia, with the exception of those 2 things that I mentioned previously. Before I show you how all of that works, I guess it's good to start at the beginning. How do we get there? And I'm going to switch back to perhaps my own camera. The first question that most people ask is, why did Estonia digitalize? Why did they even decide to do that? Because we've got many countries in the region that had similar situations. Some people say, oh, Estonia digitalized because it's small. That's completely nonsensical, because there are many small countries that are not digital at all. There are some big countries that are way more digitalized than small countries. Some people think that it's because we were poor, because as a post-Soviet nation that regained independence on the 20th of August, 1991, exactly on my birthday, actually, that has something to do with it, that because of the several decades of Soviet occupation, that there was no money left in the bank. And that's true. But it's not really the full story, because there are many poor countries around the world and they don't all digitalize, do they? So in a way, Estonia was very lucky because it was a sort of perfect storm for digitalization. Number one, as I mentioned at the very, very start of my presentation, population density in Estonia is very low. We are competing with countries like Brazil, Canada, and the US. So a few big cities by Estonian standards. We've got the capital Tallinn with just over 400,000 people. Second biggest city is 100,000 people. And then you go down very, very fast. So the 4th biggest city has 20,000 people, and so on and so on. So when Estonia regained independence on my birthday, the question was, how do we rebuild this system of governance, of bureaucratic structures, bearing in mind that we don't have the population size that would work in those offices? Yeah, we simply don't have the people that would work for us. And add to that, that we don't have enough money to pay them anyway, even if we had the population. The third factor that I would probably point to is that Estonia was lucky in the sense that Tallinn was, since the 1960s, the home of the Soviet Union's Cybernetics Institute. So since the 1960s, we've had a few, I will generously say, IT specialists at the time. Of course, it was a bit early back then, who thought that this could be the future, that digitalization could really lead the way forward for such a poor and empty country as Estonia. But then ultimately, I think what sort of sealed the deal was the Estonian mentality. In some ways, it's very Germanic. It's my word is my bond, very timely, very reliable, very straightforward as well, sometimes a bit too direct. As opposed to Germans, Estonians have a very pragmatic can-do attitude, though. So I don't know if you've ever worked with Germans in your professional career. They are very thorough, very smart, if I do say so myself. But they tend to prefer the process of solving the problem in their heads more than actually solving the problem. And this is where they differ from Estonians. Estonians then say, well, I have an idea. Why don't we try that? And then if we see that it fits, I don't know, it works for 70% of the cases, then we optimize the solution afterwards. The other part of Estonian characteristics that I would point to is that they hate talking to people. So Americans are quite chatty, I'm sure you're aware, especially when you come to Western Europe or Northern Europe even. Estonians are even a step less talkative than the average German or Swede. So if an Estonian could express their opinion with 2 words, they will try to cut it down to 1. And for them, the realization was, if we do digitalization really, really, really well, we never have to talk to a government office ever again. And that's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, the truth of the matter is that, yes, I mean, nobody likes sitting in a government office, but perhaps for a Spaniard or an Italian or an American, it is a bit more bearable than for an Estonian, simply because we're a bit less chatty up here. So all of these things conspired in 1994 for the parliament to pass the first draft resolution on a digital strategy. That's when the decision was made that we as a country will go digital. It was a societal contract as such. And over the next 5 years, Estonia would create the sort of legal framework, get the funding together, because to be quite honest, the government had all of those ideas ready in 1994 and had some money for it as well. And they approached Microsoft and IBM. And I talked to the prime minister, to the person who was the then prime minister, and he said the proposal by IBM and Microsoft had 3 zeros too many at the end. It was simply too expensive, which is understandable. For a post-Soviet country, to pay American wages is not an easy task. But what it spurred in response was a domestic digitalization effort where all forces would be mobilized to educate the entire population in terms of digitalization, how to use computers. There were educational programs that brought internet connections and computers into every single school in the country. Programming classes are part of every single curriculum in the country and have been for around 2 decades now. And all of these things came together. So over those 5 years where the framework was built, where those where pieces of legislation were passed so that data exchange between different authorities could happen. This is still not legal in many countries in the world because they have a very, I want to say, I hope some of you are familiar with crab mentality. That if one crab tries to get out of the bucket, that the rest of the crabs pull it back in. And so the realization here is that, well, I am the owner, I'm the DMV, and I'm asking for citizens' data, and I want to keep that data because it is mine. I'm invested in acquiring that data, and I shall not share it with anyone ever, even if for good reasons. So in Estonia, that was one of the first pieces of legislation to say authorities are, on a legal foundation, allowed to exchange data. 5 years later, in 1999, the government brought online the first digital service for the population. Maybe you want to put something into the chat. What do you think was the first solution that Estonia brought online for the population? Or maybe what would you have done? There are sort of 2 competing ideas here. Number 1 would be to start with a small pilot project in one area of the country to see whether it actually works. The other option would be to start with a big service to get people excited around the entire country, but to maybe have it fail as well. Think about healthcare.gov. So there are different roads here, and I see we already have some suggestions. Voting, healthcare insurance. Well, I think healthcare is a very, very complex thing that would include hundreds of services, actually. I guess online voting would be sort of one service solution. That is a good idea. Car-related services, yeah, many people drive cars. But what I do like, groceries, what I do like is that you all think big. And that's how you can tell that you're not politicians. Because every single political representative that I've had in the briefing center would say, let's start with one federal state, one district, and start with, yeah, you know, how to update your driver's license, like something that happens every 10 years or so. Estonia thought basically exactly as big as you did. The first service that came online in 1999 was the tax declaration. And people started using it very fast because It turns out that Estonians like money just like everyone else around the world. And the whole proposal by the government back then was, if you declare your taxes online, you will get the refund if you are deserving of a refund. You will get your refund within 2 working weeks. If you do it on paper, it will take up to 3 months because there are people that have to run that data through the different offices. Yeah. And so that was a very interesting factor, a very interesting proposition for the population. And what we saw was that the sticking rate, not just for the tax declaration, but also many other services, was extremely high. That meant, yes, there was a slow uptake. You know, at the start, maybe a couple of thousand people would use it, and then more and more year over year. But the sticking rate was so high, meaning that people who would try it out once online will not go back. And this is already important, that you keep them in that digital journey and then start optimizing the service, the way the design looks, the way the journey works for the user. So yeah, the tax declaration affects literally every single household in the country by default. So it was a very smart start, in my opinion. So over the next 10 or 20 years, Estonia started working on organically growing its service portfolio, ranging from legally binding digital signatures that would have to be accepted by every single government authority in the country. So you can sign any PDF digitally, send it to the DMV or whoever, and they have to accept it. Done. Yeah. And that was one of those things where Estonia forced both sides. It forced all government authorities to offer their services online over time. It forced all government authorities to accept digital signatures and so on. It also forced the population in some ways. One way of forcing the population was to say that the electronic ID card is mandatory for every single person in this country. So I am a foreigner. I'm German. I only have German citizenship, but I still get an electronic ID card from Estonia that looks exactly like the ID card of an Estonian citizen. Every single person who lives here for more than 3 months must get one of those because the government wants us to use all of those online services, just like anyone who would hold an Estonian citizenship. In connection to that card, we have something called a personal code, which might sound familiar to you at first. Sounds a bit like your social security number, except for one big difference. I can tell you my number, you can write it down, and I don't care. So in Estonia, we have this 11-digit code. You can write it down. It's 391082000087. The reason I can tell you is that the number is not the key to any of my data. And the reason I know it by heart is because I use it every day to log into government portals, to I don't know, send a transaction through my bank account and so on. Because the electronic identity is not just used by the public sector, but also by private sector companies that want to join, that want to use that system as a foundation for electronic authentication. In general, we have, I'm going to say 3.5 e-ID carriers, so electronic identity carriers. The first one is the ID card. We've got a chip card on the back that you would put into a card reader and then connected via USB. The second electronic ID carrier is what we call mobile ID. It's a SIM card that you can get from any network provider in the country. You put it into your phone instead of your regular SIM card. It does all the same things as a regular SIM card. And it also carries the sort of electronic identity. So now you can log in, you don't need your ID card anymore. You can log into all the state portals on your phone without any other tools. And then you just have PIN 1, which is the sort of login authentication password, and PIN 2, which is the digital signature with which you confirm a legally binding decision. You would also use PIN 2 to cast your vote online, for example. The third electronic identity carrier is what we call Smart ID. Smart ID is an app that you can download for iOS and Android. And again, it serves like the other two carriers. You have 2 PIN codes and you just register through your Smart ID when you log in anywhere in the government sector and anywhere sort of in the banking sector, whatever company decides to join that portfolio. I just saw some questions. 3 questions actually already. Okay, has any e-service ever been hacked? No. Well, we have to differentiate here. First of all, have any databases been breached? And the answer is no. There has been no single incident of any data set in government databases being copied, destroyed, changed, or anything like that. I will talk about why that is soon. The second part of the question is, what about identity fraud, I suspect? How easy is it to assume someone else's identity? The answer is it's not impossible. If I give you my ID card and I tell you my 2 PIN codes, yes, you can log in on my behalf. But the same is true for, I don't know, the social security number or me seeing your signature on a receipt and using it to open a bank account at a different bank. So it's not impossible, but it's a lot harder to pull off than it is on paper and in other countries around the world. The second question, how many hackers attack each day? I'm going to sort of expand that question to how many cyber attacks. And there are different degrees of sophistication. So we've had around 13,000 notifications of cyber attacks, attempted cyber attacks in the last year. Which is not, I mean, first of all, that's obviously, there's a huge gray number that is not being reported. But those where people might have doubts or worries, those are obviously being reported. The severity of those attacks can differ drastically. You know, it could be a spam email, it could be some ransomware attack, it could be a more sophisticated attack, maybe a DDoS attack to bring down servers of the government. So there are different types. Most of them are not severe, but yes, we do face daily attacks on our servers because we have all of our data online. We don't have physical paper registries anymore. So that is absolutely part of life. And it also means that we have to think about risk management every single day. Is there privacy when you carry a government issued SIM card? It's not government issued. So all the different network providers, they work with a government certified provider that basically they certify the electronic identity part on that SIM card. That's all they do. So it's not like the government is a phone provider now or something like that. And there is one more question. The physical card or phone needs to be present in order to use services. Yes, technically. So you always need, it's always 2-factor authentication. You either have to have the ID card or the SIM card in your phone or the app on your phone. One of those 3 things, and then always the 2 PIN codes in your head. So that's how we secure your access. We have a rudimentary form of this with chip credit. Yeah, I guess in a way it does work like a bank card. You know, it's a very similar chip. The Estonian ID card chips have a smaller storage capacity so that you can't load malware onto the chip. But yes, generally speaking, it's a very similar system. How have older citizens adapted to digitalization? Now, that's a very good question. I did mention education already, and that indeed is one of the less attractive and glorious parts of digitalization, but it has to be done. And it is something that most countries like to ignore because it's not something that politicians can point to and say, I built this bridge, or, you know, I created this program. It's not cool to say, I taught my grandma how to use Google Chrome. Yeah. So in Estonia, we had 2 programs, 2 educational programs. One was called Tiger Leap. I mentioned it already. That was the one to bring internet connection and computers into every single school in the country. And then there was one that was grammatically incorrectly named Look at World, not Look at the World. That would be terrible. It was effectively government-funded circus tents filled with computers and printers and scanners, where they would move through every single village in the country and invite the general population to say, hey, it was the late 90s, early 2000s, remember. This is a mouse click. That's Microsoft Word. This is how you open Internet Explorer. This is how Windows 95 works. Yeah. So the realization was that if you don't teach those basics, you can have the most beautiful customer journey and the most useful online services, but if your grandma can't get to the website, it's no good. So Estonia engaged in that very, very early on, and it paid off. How about older citizens' participation these days? Well, first of all, I think it's incredibly rude of you, Laura, to assume that it's only the elderly who struggle with digitalization. No, it is, of course, we talk about digital risk groups. Yes, it is the elderly. It's also people with disabilities, people with a lower socioeconomic background as well. So there are different challenges. Some people don't have a phone. So how do we deal with that? The first answer is education. The second answer is that all of these online services are still accessible offline as well. So to give you one example, in Estonia, 96% of tax declarations are filed online within 3 minutes or less. The people that don't do it online, 4% are left over. They can go to the offices and they will also face queues at the office that are 96% shorter. So whether you do it on or offline, you still benefit from the system, which I think is important to point out, because then people think like, well, if some people don't do it online, then what's the point? No, there is a point. So, and also you have to maintain accessibility for all kinds of people. The websites themselves are all standardized and conceptualized according to what we call WCAG 2.0 standard. It's a disability accessibility sort of a protocol, which makes it easier for people with visual impairments and so on. Finally, I think it's also about the user experience. If you simply mirror the offline experience online, then people have no incentive to do it online, because why would they try to learn a new process that doesn't do anything better? But the faster you do it, the more user-friendly you make it for the population, the more they will start using those services, you know, on their own. You don't have to force anyone. There are some countries that force their population online. Portugal says, and they are correct in this, that 100% of taxes are declared online. Yes, because you force them. You force the population to go to the office and then help them do their stuff online there. So you're not actually saving time, but you technically do have that statistic for you. In Estonia, we have, for example, with online voting. Last year, we had national parliamentary elections. And of all votes that were cast, 46.7% of votes were cast online. That's basically a 50-50 split between paper and online, which means that, yeah, some people want to do it on paper because it's a tradition for them. Not just the elderly, but also just families that say, we're going to go out on a Sunday and we're going to have lunch and then we're going to go vote and then we're going to have coffee and cake. It's going to be great. So it's a thing. It's a cultural thing, potentially. We've actually seen statistically that one of the more proactive user groups for online voting is aged 65 and older, because for them, we solve more problems. They have sometimes physical limitations. The elderly do tend to live in more rural areas as well. So for them, the incentive to use iVoting is a lot higher than it would be for a millennial who lives, 10 minutes from the polling station anyway. So it's very important to be mindful of those differences. Have people found computer access easier with smartphones? I guess you mean, have people found a digital service access easier with smartphones than with computers?
Yeah, like the adjustment from the mouse click kind of old school computer to using a handheld device, and kind of the ease of access of apps. Like, have people, like the people that have struggled before, have they found it easier to use the smartphone era?
So we've seen, good question. We've seen high usage rates even when smartphones were not really that prevalent. But what we have seen is, since smartphones have become more dominant in the market, that while the usage rates remain around the same level, more and more people do switch to smartphone usage. So that would intend it would sort of imply to me that that there is an accessibility plus to using smartphones, yeah. Even though the UX, the layout of the website is exactly the same, and the service journey is exactly the same. But yeah, if it's okay with you, I will take one more question and then maybe continue with my presentation for a tiny bit. Voting in the US is very contested. Online voting here would be very problematic, I believe. How politically divided is Estonia? Okay, so I'm a political scientist, I have to say. So this, you just opened several cans of worms here. Okay, I'm not going to talk about the Electoral College. I will not talk about the divisiveness of the two-party system in the US, which is a complete madness. I don't know. I can't even begin here. So we have a multi-party system in Estonia. We currently have, just thinking, I believe 6 parties in parliament, coalition government. There is not a single party in parliament that wants to go back in terms of digitalization. There is a societal contract that digitalization has continued to save us time, money, and nerves over the last decades. Parties still disagree on policy, just like in every other country in the world. Maybe not on abortion and gun laws, but still. There is one party that is currently in power that is not such a big fan of online voting. And that party started an investigation into whether online voting is a legitimate form of voting, whether it has any drawbacks in comparison to paper voting. And there were some recommendations made. However, none of them were critical, and none of them pertained as to the security of the system itself. It was rather a question of, did we explain sufficiently well to the population how the system actually functions? And the answer is, it's hard to explain. How do you explain how encryption of electronic identity works, and how you then disconnect the electronic identity, which you have to verify that it is a verifiable voter, but disconnect it from the vote that they cast? It is being done in Estonia. The source code for the entire program of online voting is online. You can check it out today, and you can download it. It doesn't matter. We do that as part of transparency measures, but also so that we can strengthen our security, so that people, cybersecurity specialists around the world, can look at our source code and say, hey, we noticed something, So it's not problematic in Estonia. And actually, especially in times of pandemic, we've seen some countries that did not hold elections that were supposed to happen. Italy had a constitutional referendum that they stopped for obvious reasons. France continued with their mayoral elections across the country, even though the pandemic was raging. That was in April, I believe. So, and in my opinion, there is no right approach here. If you continue with the elections, you put your entire population at risk. And if you don't, you might technically put democracy at risk. So Estonia could have simply continued with online voting. Yeah, that would have been it. So to have it open as an option, I think, is extremely important. Right, I'm going to get back to my presentation for a bit. We were talking about electronic ID carriers, and I mentioned that there were 3.5, and I've told you about 3: the electronic ID, the mobile ID SIM card, and the smart ID app. There is one more half carrier that I mentioned, and it is what we call e-residency. E-residency is a program that enables any person around the world to get this card. You have to apply for it online. You pay 100 euros application fee. It takes a few weeks. You go to the closest Estonian embassy. You get physically identified. You get that card. With that card, you can create a company, an Estonian company, on Estonian legal soil and run it online. So now you have a business that has direct access to the entire European single market. I'm going to start sharing my screen with you again, because this is quite an interesting phenomenon, in my opinion. Now, we have around 70,000 e-residents around the world right now. And when we created the system, the assumption was that primarily people from non-EU countries would be interested in using the solution, because they could now have a company that would be based inside the European single market. Yeah. So we were expecting, because of population size, China, India, the US, Russia to be big players. If you would have to guess, I'm going to look into the chat for just a second. If you would have to guess from which countries most EU residents hail, sort of in which country they're based, what would you expect? Why do I not there. Any thoughts about this? The country with the most EU residents. China, India, Japan, India, yeah. Quite far up, not number one. One more thought, Japan, yeah. Also quite far up the list, but not number one. The answer is Finland. That was a surprise because, well, for two reasons actually. Number one, Finland is part of the European Union. So why do they care? And number two, even if they weren't part of the European Union, they're hardly the biggest country in terms of population. So what's going on? Well, the answer can actually be found on this page as well. Yes, the Finns have the most e-residents, but they only set up the 8th most companies. So the Finns don't seem to care an awful lot about company creation in Estonia, because a Finnish company does the exact same things as an Estonian company. They're both based inside the European single market. The difference is that Finns use the e-residency card because they can create legally binding digital signatures with them as well. So if you have a Finnish company, you run your Finnish business and you have an Estonian corporation partner, as many Finnish companies do. You use the e-residency card to sign all manners of contracts and documents and agreements and invoices digitally. Takes you 20 seconds and then it's all legally binding. The Germans have the 4th most e-residents, but they create the 2nd most companies because creating a company in Germany sucks, quite frankly. So in Germany, you have to have, well, first of all, you have to have a notary and a tax advisor from the get-go. You have to have 25,000 euros in hand because that's the starting capital. And you have to have 1 month time because that's how long it takes usually to register a company. In Estonia, you do it online. You don't need a notary. You don't need a tax advisor. You pay 100 euros online registration fee. You need 2,500 euros of starting capital, but you decide when you pay that into the company. So you could say that the first 2,500 euros that you earn with your company, you put down as starting capital. Makes it a bit more flexible. And creating a company in Estonia takes 30 minutes. So I did it 3 years ago. For me, it took 30 minutes. I think the Estonian record lies at just under 20 minutes. It's quite fast. And you don't need to be a legal expert either, because in the business register, you don't need to submit your own articles of association, the sort of founding document. There are legally vetted and certified sort of drafts, templates from the government that you can sort of mix and match and piece together so that you have the articles of association that are right for you, which I think is a nice sentiment as well. So that's e-residency in a nutshell. Finally, I want to tell you, before I talk to you about all the online services, we need to talk about data protection and privacy measures. There are several measures that help secure data and help maintain privacy. First of all, we have what we call the once-only rule in Estonian government. The once-only policy means that within all of Estonian government, within all of the different government authorities, there is always only one authority that's allowed to store a certain piece of data about me, and that's allowed to ask me about it, to update itself with regards to that set as well. This means that, let's take my address as an example. Only the Estonian population register is allowed to ask me for my address. If the tax authority, if the voting register, if the DMV needs my address, they are forbidden from asking me. They have to ask digitally, automatically, the server of the population register. Which makes, well, it means two things. First of all, it makes my data a lot more secure because, well, hackers in most countries are not stupid. They know that the data is being asked by every single government authority, is being duplicated in every single server in all the different government authorities' databases. So they know, I'm just going to find the least protected server in the entire government spectrum, and I will get all of my citizens' data from there. And this is what's been happening in many countries around the world, not just the US, for many, many years. Yeah. Maybe the DMV server is not as well protected as the health register or something like that, and then they get their personal data from there. That is a lot harder in Estonia because it's all decentralized and once only. But it also means that it makes my life easier, because when I move to a new apartment in a new city, in a new state, I change my address online once. I don't need to tell all the different government authorities, hey, by the way, I moved, hey, by the way, I moved, hey, by the way, I moved. Which also means that the government authorities are much more up to date and have more reliable data sets that they can use for statistical purposes. Whereas in the US and many other countries, you could say, for education purposes, I am living in this part of town, so I can send my school to that school district. For health matters, I actually live over there in that one apartment that I'm renting out, because that's where the best doctor is situated, and so on and so on. So you can sort of mix and match and trick the government and the private sector. In Estonia, that doesn't work. So that's the once only rule. The second thing, I've already alluded to it earlier, is what we call digital by default. Yes, you can still do every single thing on paper. All the different services are online, offline and online. But if you submit something on paper, the people working at the government authorities will digitalize the data. Digitalizing means that they don't just scan it, a handwritten PDF, something like that. They will enter the data, type it in so that it's machine readable, that computers can run the data afterwards, that humans don't need to touch it anymore. This also solves one of the biggest privacy concerns. If I would ask you, which government authority has looked at your address over the last 5 years, and for what reason? Which doctor has looked at your health records, when and why? I don't think you can tell me. And the reason is simple. It's decentralized data sets. Some are online, some are on paper. There is no general audit trail or accountability mechanisms installed in the system. In Estonia, we have what we call truth by design. Truth by design means that in the state portal, I can see every single time which government authority looked at what part of my data, when and why. It's pretty straightforward. But this allows me to, well, this allows Estonians, citizens and residents alike, to reestablish the balance of power between society and the state. Because in most other countries, you have to rely on the government doing its job lawfully. And if we're being honest, they're not. The NSA is looking at your data whether you like it or not. Secret services around the world are looking at your data and store it of completely innocent citizens. Without you ever having done anything wrong, without there ever being any profiling done, they just store it just in case. In Estonia, they can't do that by law, and there will be cryptological traces if Secret Service looks at my data. Now, there are exceptions to that rule in Estonia as well. For example, if there is an active police investigation, the police officers in question can withhold their access to my data because they might not want to tip me off that they're looking at me right now. That is a valid concern for law enforcement. But the cryptological trace is still there, and it has to be revealed after the conclusion, after the end of the criminal investigation. And that is an automated procedure that just happens as part of closing the investigation. I'm going to show you how that works in a second. So that's what the system is founded upon. Those are the sort of sets of legislation and the reasons why this works in Estonia. There's one more aspect that I will share with you before we look at the services, and it's what we call the X-Road. Oops, that's not the right. The X-Road is run by the Estonian Information System Authority, which is part of the Ministry for Economic Affairs and Communications. And the X-Road is the data exchange communication and encryption mechanism that helps different data authorities exchange data between each other. And this is what the X-Road looks like. As you can see, it's an extremely decentralized system, which means it's also extremely resilient against cyber attacks. This is also the living proof that we don't just have one super database where all your data is stored. And it is also supportive of the once only rule. This is how the different connections between the different servers happen. Do we have any programmers in the group? Any sort of IT specialists? Maybe we do, maybe we don't, just in case. Or maybe you want to try out the X-Road in your organization or in your federal state or something like that. There's good news, because the source code for the X-Road, just like the source code for online voting, is available online. It was last updated 23 hours ago, and you can have it for free. Estonia invented the X-Road. We're not the only ones who use it. Finland runs completely on the X-Road. Iceland joined last year. Parts of Denmark are running on the X-Road. And there are some other countries that have bought, and federal states, sort of parts of countries, that have bought commercially available solutions that are based on the X-Road. They buy those solutions rather than just taking the free source code, because they want to have the server hardware, the setup, the expertise, the know-how, and so on, alongside with it. Among those countries that are using commercially available versions of the X-Road would be Ukraine, but also Namibia, Azerbaijan, but also parts of Portugal. So there are many different parts around the world that are looking at this. And we also have some clients in the Caribbean that are holding elections very soon and looking into implementing the X-Road afterwards. But now, so this is basically the foundation of how all the different services work. If there is a service, for example, online voting, you log in with your electronic identity, but then the server needs to know where do you actually, in which voting district do you live. Then they get through the X-Road, they get that data from the population register. If you would get, I don't know, an electronic prescription, then there has to be a connection between the electronic health database and the pharmacy to verify that it's a certified pharmacy, but also that a certified doctor handed you out that digital prescription and so on. So that's what the X-Road is for. But enough talk about technology, let's talk about services and solutions. I want to log into the portal, and we have 5 login solutions. We've got the ID card, we've got the mobile ID SIM card, we've got the Smart ID app. The other 2 are not so important. Let's take my Smart ID app. I have to remember my personal code. Again, I can tell you that one. It's not a big secret. It is 39108200087. And when I click on continue, we can see on this screen, we will see a tiny code that hopefully shows the same code on the computer screen as well. 5271, that's right. And now I have to enter my PIN 1, which is the number I do not tell you, which is obviously 1234. And then it says login successful. And then we're inside the portal, we switch to English. And now let me show you how 99% of all government services look. Well, we click on topics, that's the first start. Many government portals around the world, they have some services online, but they are structured in a very archaic manner. You would find perhaps Department for Social Affairs, Department for Education, Department for Health, and then you, the citizen, have to figure out what happens where. You know, if I don't know, I want to get a prescription, yeah, fine, it's the health department, but what about childbirth? You know, yes, it's a health matter, but also I would get child support maybe in some countries. I might have to register my child for primary school, so that's an educational matter. Like, where do I go with this stuff? In Estonia, we have it according to topics. So, for example, under healthcare, you've got every single thing health related. Under family, you've got everything ranging from marriage to the preschool child. Oops, sorry. To working or studying parents, to elderly people, pet registration, or the registration of a death or funeral. So every single thing that's connected to family, regardless of under whose authority or responsibility it would lie, would be connected here. Under doing business, you can find everything from establishing a company to paying your taxes to registering for your residency. So everything is there. Under education and research, you've got everything from general education to national defense education, vocational education, and so on. If you don't know where something is, you can still say, hey, I am, sorry, I'm just gonna refresh that. I am, why does it not show up right now? This is what in German we call the presentation effect, when you want to show something and it doesn't. That is interesting. Okay, well, usually it would show, maybe they're updating the system right now. Usually you would enter like, I'm pregnant, and then it would show you where, what service it would be. But that's actually not the most important part, because you can also do it right here. You can just click on the live event called Birth of a Child. And here we have all these different things bundled that you would probably want to know, or the service that you would like to use in case you are getting pregnant or you're about to go into labor. Ranging from how big is my maternity benefit to how do I register my kid with a family doctor, and so on. A tiny fun fact about Estonia, maternity leave in Estonia is 1.5 years long. It is 100% of your salary. And after those 1.5 years, you have 1.5 more years of job guarantee. So after 2 years, 11 months, 29 days, you can go back to your old job, no questions asked, which I think is quite nice because, well, I mean, if you're a country with low birth rates and you want to keep your local population strong and happy, then maternity benefit or parental leave overall is a good idea. And in Estonia, you can divide it up as you like. So the mother can take the first year, the father gets the last 6 months or something like that. So you've already seen the jump from having it sort of service by service to tying it into so-called live events. The next step from this, and I have to tell you, Estonians are not happy with this system. They think it's unwieldy, it's not good enough, the services are not easy enough, and so on. Let me explain it by the example of childbirth, actually, while we're talking about it. When a baby is born, or in Estonia, I should say, if a baby is born, given the birth rates, if a baby is born, the doctor registers the birth of the child online. That's been happening for the last 20 years. And through that registration process, the doctor would generate a personal code for the baby automatically. And that personal code would then be connected to the personal codes of the parents because they are the legal guardians of the kid. So now the government knows, number one, there's a new child. Number two, these are the parents. So then parents started asking, well, if the government now knows all of these things, why do we still need to apply for child benefits? Why don't we just get a notification in the state portal that says, congratulations on the birth of your child, to which bank account do you want the money? The government has, if you think about it, the government has every single piece of information that it needs to offer you that service. Why do they make you run for it? Why do they make you fill out all that stuff again and again? That's a fair question. So that's why that service that I just mentioned came online in Estonia last year in October. Oh, Monica is joining us. Hi, Monica. It's the first of what we call proactive government services. We want to roll out those proactive government services more and more over the next few years. I want to give you one more example, perhaps, because it sort of it affects several sectors. And most governments know the following information. If a child is born, and we know that a child is born, we know the address of the parents, and we know just as a system parameter that every child must go to primary school. We could let these 3 data points connect and talk to each other. And we could create a new notification that says, congratulations on the birth of your child. Here are the 3 closest primary schools to your location. You can choose one of them, or any other in the country, if you know that you're moving in 3 years, which we don't know yet because we're the government, we're not Google or Facebook. And we will reserve a place for your child at that school for 6 years into the future. This means 2 things. First of all, it means that I don't forget to register my child for primary school, which I think is nice, and would otherwise mark me out as a potentially bad and unfit parent. But more importantly, every single school in the country could get a notification, hey, in 6 years, you will have 1,000 more students than you have right now. It's just demographics. we know state information. We know how many teachers you employ right now. We know how many classrooms you have. Based on those calculations, we know that in 6 years, you will need 50 new classrooms and 100 new teachers. We can start the building applications. We can start the funding requirements right now so that the classrooms are ready when they are needed. And then maybe the government realizes that, I mean, university education in Estonia is free in general, but maybe the government realizes that in 3 years, they will run out of biology teachers. Just happens to be that way. Maybe then they can find out that we have a shortage of biology teachers, and it's going to happen in 3 years. Why don't we create incentives right now so that we will have the biology teachers ready in 3 years as well? So this is what we're working on right now. Estonia is painfully aware that yes, our system is pretty digital and it's very nice and it's very user-friendly, but we are not using all data to the optimal amount or extent. There is work to be done. And we want to roll out more and more of those proactive services around over the next years. The final step is what we call Krat. Krat is a Estonian mythical creature. It's sort of, it's a persona that consists of inanimate objects. But now with this persona, these inanimate objects, they form one body and it can move and do work and communicate. And the whole deal about the Krat, the whole morale of the story, as far as I understand it, is that it can do everything. It can fulfill all tasks for you, but you must keep it busy. And if you do not keep it busy, it will turn against its owner, you. Estonians thought that was a very nice analogy for AI. And over the next few years, we want to implement over 200 AI solutions. We will have more than 50 implemented by the end of this year. And they range in terms of complexity. We already have some online, have had some online for a couple of years, actually. For example, we have an algorithm in the Estonian Unemployment Insurance Fund. They are the ones who also match unemployed people with job vacancies. And we have an algorithm that matches unemployed people with job vacancies with a higher success rate than the humans that have worked there for 20 years. Which sounds scary and also counterintuitive because, you know, people have to talk to people to find out what they're good at and what they would like to work as and so on. But it's actually not true. Turns out to be not true, surprisingly. Another example would be in Estonia, being part of the European Union, we have EU agriculture subsidy funds, which farmers get if they tend their fields, if they mow their fields and so on, more than twice a year. Now, what happens in most countries is that there are agricultural authorities that send out people in cars, it's very environmentally friendly, and send them around the whole country to check whether people mow their fields. Estonia is using satellite imagery with depth sensors and AI image recognition software that would analyze whether a field was mowed or not. And that would then update the database. In Estonia, with that system, we have a 90% success rate, which means that only for the last 10%, we have to send people out, which I don't have to explain to you how much more environmentally, financially, societally smarter that is. But yeah, and there are many more to come. The final step, this is going to take 5 to 8 years, is that we want to use the voice assistants that are already on your phone to provide all of the different services that we've talked about so far, that we've had online for many, many years, and tie them all into one human-friendly system. Because the truth of the matter is that none of us were born wanting or knowing how to navigate websites. Humans are not made to work with screens. Humans are made to talk, most of them anyway. So Estonia is working on implementing all of these services with Siri and Google and Alexa and so on, so that one day you can just imagine, here's an example. Imagine you are Estonian, your wife is Estonian. You're going to Finland. Your wife is pregnant. And in Finland, your wife feels that the water's about to break. She's about to go into labor. You realize you're not going to make it to Estonia in time. What do? Well, the plan is that in a few years' time, you will tell your voice assistant, my wife is about to go into labor. And then the voice assistant will tell you, I'm going to get back to you in 30 seconds. And within those 30 seconds, it will alert the nearest Finnish hospital. It will forward your electronic patient data from Estonia to that hospital. It will alert an ambulance and send that health data to the ambulance so that they know the health data of your wife. It will alert the Estonian embassy in Helsinki so that they can create passport, ID, and so on for the baby. It will also start all the proactive services that are already in use, such as the initiation of child benefit payments, so that after those 30 seconds are over, it can get back to you, and the AR just says, don't worry, it's all done, and the ambulance is going to be there in 2.5 minutes. So this is the plan. I will send you a link. Nope, that's not the one. Yes. This is a sort of a second story about how AI with voice assistants could work. Ah, Manuel already posted. Fantastic. Yes. Sorry, I meant for some reason. Okay.
No, I posted on the class.
Yeah. I saw. So this is the plan where we're going. And I think I would show you 2 more things, and then I would open to the questions that were already posted and also to others that you might still have. Number 1, I want to show you how online voting works because it's my favorite thing. So you have to download the application. You have to have some sort of computing device. You have to enter your ID card or mobile ID or smart ID. You have to enter your phone number. This is a demo, so I'm just like some sort of dummy. I'm just going to put my phone number there. It's going to show the control code on my phone then as well, so I make sure that it's the right one. Then this is, of course, my name. This is, of course, my personal code. Tells me that it's a demo election. Click on proceed. And we see that we are voting in the election district called the Forest. That is part of the animal kingdom. We have all the different animal parties on the left-hand side. If it's okay with you, I'm going to vote for the Beaver Party, for the European beaver as the candidate. Are you sure that you want to vote for this candidate? You will be asked to enter your mobile ID PIN 2, the digital signature, and then that's it. Now, I can't click on vote now because it would send a code to a phone number that doesn't exist right now, but I'm going to show you what you will see afterwards. I did take a photo when I voted last year because it was super cool. Just 1 second. Yes. Yeah, there it is. So I'm going to stop sharing. No, I'm going to show you this. So at the end, it's going to show you a massive QR code. And it's going to inform you that your vote was cast and that you can vote again as many times as you want. The QR code enables you to scan it with your phone independently from the network that you connected to with your laptop. So you can scan that QR code, and on your phone you can see whether the vote, the way you gave it, arrived unchanged at the voting server. Maybe you thought it was a smart idea to vote through your local airport's Wi-Fi, super secure, of course. So this way you can check that nothing was changed or altered on the way to the voting server. The notification that you can vote as many times as you want is also super important, because otherwise it would mean that I can break into your house, hold a gun to your head and say, vote for this candidate, or bribe you or something like that. And I could be certain that your vote is cast on my behalf effectively for another candidate. With this system, we allow you to to change your vote again and again and again. In Estonia, we have a 10-day voting period every single time. The first 7 days are digital only. During those 7 times, you can vote as many times as you want. Then there are 2 days of sort of a break period where they're tabulating the results for the online vote. And then you have the final election day where people go to the physical polling stations. The physical vote will always override your digital vote. But let's hope that you will not have to make that choice. But just in case it is still there. So as I already said, sort of halfway through the presentation, in 2019, out of all votes cast, 46%, almost 47% were cast online, and the elderly were very active in online voting as well. Finally, I want to show you the digital signature. How does it work? Well, let's imagine we have a contract here. This could be a rental agreement. I could be selling you my car. It could be, it could be anything really. And we want to sign it. We right-click the document. We click on Sign Digitally. I could add some more documents to this. We have this digital container into which I can drag and drop more files. I don't want to. And then I can sign with my ID card, with mobile ID, or with Smart ID. Now, I will use my Smart ID app. I enter my personal code. When I click on Sign, you know the drill. It will show me a couple of options, 6029, and then here it will tell me I've got 3 options and I have to choose the correct one. So I can't just blindly say, yes, it's the right one, and then enter my PIN 2. So now I have to enter my PIN 2, and then it says that's correct. And then the document has been legally signed. So this now took what, 10 seconds? The digital signature alone saves 2% of the Estonian GDP every single year, because you save around 20 minutes of time on every single signature. So you don't have to drive anywhere, you don't have to print out any documents, you don't have to drive back, you don't have to decide how and when to meet with the other contract parties and so on. And instead, I could just, if one of you guys had a mobile ID SIM card, or the Smart ID app, or the ID card, I could enter your number here and you could sign it from New Mexico as well, right? So it is location and time independent. And that's how we save an awful lot of money. Now, this would be the sort of conclusion of my part of the presentation. I will now switch back to the questions that we've already got. Where's the chat? There it is. I guess that was asked in connection to a certain topic. Does that information get auto-transferred to the other entities? What was that about, Ryan?
Yeah, that was prior to going into the X road and how they're all connected. So that was kind of answered. And then the proactive services answered my original thought. Like if you have a workflow, you go in and you update your address, does that auto populate out to all the other entities that need it? Or is it like requested at the time by that service, right?
Yes.
So kind of like what I guess it sounds like you're moving towards maybe more of that automated population for some of this?
No, because that would go against the once only rule. All the different authorities only have the permission to ask for your data when it's needed. So there is something called it's an RIHA catalog. It's only in Estonian because it's meant for Estonian public sector use mostly. Basically, it's a catalog that shows every single digital transaction that is allowed between every single digital server connected to the X road. So you can see, for example, the voting register is allowed to check your address from the population register every election year, but not in between. The tax authority is allowed to check whether you have any secondary or tertiary addresses every single time you log into the tax authority portal and want to declare your income taxes, something like that. So auto population would not be allowed because it would duplicate the data and would run the whole system ad absurdum. Yeah.
Gotcha.
But good question.
Thank you.
No worries. Everything is so automated. Is there a threat of creating a Wall-E type situation? Can you explain to me what a Wall-E type situation is? I usually hear Big Brother first, but what does Wall-E do?
So Wall-E is a movie, a Disney, I think it's
I watched
Disney
the movie. I don't remember what online voting was there. I know.
Well, not related to online voting, but everything in e-Estonia is automated. It seems like no one really has to do anything or talk to anybody. So in the movie Wall-E, as you probably remember, everyone just kind of sat in their chairs and drank their liquid and just kind of interacted with people with the screen in front of their face, which I know is extreme, but it's just, I love the automation. I love the saving money. I love the environmental bonuses to this, but I just worry that we're going to lose touch socially if everything is digitized, everything is electronic.
I wholeheartedly disagree. I think that's not digitalization, that's capitalism. I think that in Estonia, because you don't spend so much time, I don't know, entering everything online and so on, you have way more time to follow your hobbies and passions and so on. It is no secret that Estonians are not the most keen on that social interaction, but they would have technically more time for that. And I guess if the US would digitalize as much as Estonia, then you could be the living proof that digitalization can provide more time for social interaction as well. The whole point also going towards this voice assistant sort of unified AI would be to sort of minimize people's interaction with the social, with the public service anyway, right? So what ties us to the screens these days already is primarily the private sector, if we're being honest, if we're talking about the Facebooks and the Netflixes of the world. So I think that's where the greater challenge lies. How do we avert that? Can we? Should we? That's a lot of ethical questions that I will leave to you. If services can be provided in person or online, is the government bureaucracy the same size or smaller? Haha. So technically, I guess, some people expect that we have a much lower percentage of government workers. Not true. The OECD average lies around 20.3%. Estonia is at around 21%. The difference is that the people that work in our offices don't push around paper. They get to focus on things that require human input. If you think about it, I don't want to name a percentage here, but there will be a lot of people in every single bureaucracy around the world that just forward data from one authority to the next, that deal with internal compliance to make sure that nobody looked at the data who was not supposed to look at the data. So all of these things that are just done because there is no proper digital structure underneath. In Estonia, these people, they were made redundant, but they were not fired. So they were just given new jobs as part of what Estonia calls its digital lifelong learning strategy. We have one that is spearheaded by the Educational Ministry until 2030. And it's sort of, digitalization, and we have to be honest here, digitalization will take some jobs away. Absolutely. We already see it in the private sector that we've got Estonian parcel robots delivering parcels from Amazon in several cities in the US. And lots of different stuff. You've got self-checkout tills in the supermarket. We are digitalizing ourselves away. We have to be very frank about this. And the public sector is no different here. But what the public sector can do is help in retraining and acknowledging that digitalization will happen. And this is by no means an endorsement for any previous runners for the presidential nomination. Andrew Yang was the only person who ever talked about digitalization as a sort of job-changing economic factor. And this is something that continues to be ignored both, we don't have to talk about Trump and Biden, but on both sides of the aisle, it is not being talked about at all. And I think that's one of the biggest risks for the US as well. If I may recommend a tiny video, you know what, I'm gonna post the link right, just a second. It's an 8-minute video. Sorry, it's 15 minutes, but it is good, and I highly recommend you watch it. It's just about sort of what sectors we can expect to be digitalized away over the next 5 years, 10 years, and so on, and what effects that will have on our economy. There you go. So yeah, to answer your question, Michael, basically the same, but you could make it smaller if you wanted to. You mentioned that the Estonian people don't always like these systems. Is the pressure from them to improve them, or is it to abolish them, or both? It is 99% to improve them. First of all, because going back would be very unsustainable. Imagine all those digital records that you would now have to write down on paper again. That would be a bit weird. And also in terms of security and financial and economic and environmental savings, it's immeasurable. No party is blind to these advantages. Again, yeah, Estonia is working on improving them constantly, and we attract IT talent from around the world in our quest to do just that. At the same time, we also grow our own domestic talent. In Estonia, every 10th university student studies IT. That is the highest number in the entire Western world. Catherine asks questions. I believe people are afraid of digitization, likely because of the incredibly massive data breaches we have experienced in the US and around the world. Step-by-step digitalization could happen, but maybe it would need to be limited. I'm going to focus on the US here. You guys need to fix some fundamental infrastructural problems before we can talk about digitalization. The first one is to have a national ID. An electronic ID that is compulsory. I mean, that would already pour so much gasoline on the political fire. In some countries, some other countries as well. In the UK, they don't have an ID card, so you know that's a massive challenge. But you can't have any secure digital services without a secure digital identity that everyone has. So that it's not a matter of privilege. You know how you've got disenfranchised communities up and down the country in the US that can't vote that easily, that can't use the access services so easily. That has to be changed from the ground up. And then it's a question of how you build up those systems. We have to be clear about this. Digitalization is also a tool. You can abuse it with bad intentions. China is a fantastically digitalized country, but for all the wrong reasons. Yeah. In Estonia, the citizen is the owner of their data. In China, it's the Communist Party. So yes, you can create a terribly dystopian digital society in which you have a sort of night watch state that looks at everything you do. But if you build it with transparency and accountability from the ground up, as Estonia has done, then you can build trust within society as well. And we have to be it's a very interesting topic, actually. I want to do my PhD on this. How does digitalization change trust in society? What we've seen so far, very rudimentary findings, is that the trust in the structures of government has increased drastically. The trust in politicians stays the same because people still like to hate politicians. That's not a new invention, but the trust in the accountability, in the lack of corruption. You can't bribe a computer to give you the first application chance or something. So that's certainly a factor. Michael says, our attempts to digitalize healthcare created a system disliked by both patients and healthcare providers because of the lack of information sharing. Yeah, yeah, we have one national healthcare provider. I don't get why the US is the only Western country that doesn't get that. And it's you guys love capitalism, and that's all great, but capitalist sense also sort of dictates that if you have 10,000 people who all buy a Ford Ranger, they will get a worse price than if you have one guy who says, I'm going to buy 10,000 Rangers off your lot today. It's a very simple economic logic. So why don't we allow governments to negotiate prices for medicine? It's the easiest logic in the world, but even the Democrats don't argue along those lines. So I don't have an answer for you. Well, it was also not a question, but still, it's an incredibly fragmented system. This also has to do with federalization structures in the US. The US is not alone in this. My native Germany has 16 federal states, and all of them have their own education policy, which means that, for example, you can study to become a high school teacher in one county and not be able to teach next door. If you have such a system, you don't need to think about cross-nation data exchange. You need to rethink the foundation of your country. And Germany struggles with that just as much as the United States. So don't think you're alone in this. But yeah, so digitalization demands some top-down approaches as well. Money, money, money. It's all business. Yeah. Who cares about the customer? We'll discuss this varieties of capitalism concept in class on October 16th. It's in a month. I would love to join. Is it online as well?
You're always welcome, and I will record it, so I'll send you a link.
yeah, sure. What time is it?
That will be in the afternoon, 1:00 p.m.
Ooh,
so you'll.
If I'm still awake for it, I'll tune in.
There you go.
Wonderful. I don't know whether we're allowed to go over time. That's up to you guys, I guess. But I would be open for more questions if you are. Any more thoughts or questions? Okay. Can you talk about access to digital services? We'll have many parts of New Mexico that do not have internet coverage. Yeah, two things. Again, something that will never fly in the US. So I mentioned already that we have 98% 4G coverage and we have low prices. How did we get there? This is the part that the US won't like. In Estonia, all of the different network providers have built up the network infrastructure together. They all work on the same network and telecommunication masts. They just run different frequencies on those masts. This means regardless of which provider you use, you will have 98% 4G coverage. There is no, oh, I'm going to pay 10 euros less per month and then I'm going to get, 10% less coverage or something. The difference in price is small between the different providers, and the difference in quality is mainly with regards to maybe service. So one provider has a chatbot and the other has a customer service center or something like that. But that's the one of the few denominators that are not common. Has digitization had any impact on the COVID-19 response? Absolutely. As you can imagine, for us, not much changed when the pandemic hit. First of all, the pandemic did not hit so hard because the government said on a Friday, all schools will be closed next Monday. And we already have a complete e-education system online. We've had it for 10 years. We have all educational materials digitalized. So all the students were familiar with it, all the teachers were familiar with it. Some needed a refresher, of course, but overall, we transitioned to a completely online taught environment within 1 weekend. Business continued to, I'm not going to say prosper. Of course, Estonia was hit because it's an international global crisis. Yeah, Estonia had a contraction of estimated GDP in the last quarter of 6.9%, I believe, but not as hard hit as many other countries. Business continued to work because you can still sign contracts from your home, digital signatures. You can still pay your taxes. You can still create a new company. If you were made redundant, you can create a new startup on your own today. Yeah. So absolutely, and also for the health sector, tracking COVID-19 responses, health tests and results, and so on, was extremely easy. We already have the healthcare portal since 2008, where you can see every single time you've been to the doctor, every single thing that they wrote down when you were there. And they just added one button where you can click on so you can see what your COVID test result is. It's pretty straightforward, but the system was already there. Okay, can we go over time? Is that okay? Cool, great.
Please.
Okay. So how would you suggest a country starts from the ground up? 3 things, effectively: legislation. so that you allow the different data exchanges, that you allow an electronic identity to exist, that you say, in Estonia, we have the Digital Signatures Act that says a digital signature is legally equivalent to a physical one. Done. Shortest piece of legislation ever, but you have to have it. Number two, you have to have an electronic identity that is ideally universal. Number three, you have to have a data exchange mechanism. Something like the X-Road, doesn't have to be the X-Road. And then you start having services, and you decide with what you start. Estonia started with a tax declaration. We have recently had some countries that started with a digital signature because people use it every day. So that's up to you. That's the honest answer. For voting, how does Estonia verify ID and maintain anonymity? Okay, this is one of those things that's hard to explain, but we'll try. Has anyone ever done postal voting here in this group? No, maybe not. Well, maybe yes. Okay, so how it works in the physical world is you have, at least in Germany, you have two envelopes. You've got one big envelope with your identity. This is sent by person XYZ from blah, 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 blah. You have a small envelope inside with the actual vote. This is a terribly flawed process, by the way, because, first of all, the mail. Second, you trust the person at the polling station to actually open your vote, to actually count it the correct way, to not copy or destroy the vote. There's tons of stuff that could go wrong here, but people don't want to talk about that. Effectively, the digital system is very similar to the postal voting. It's just online, and it's easier to do, and it's easier to check whether it's been done the correct way. So what's done is you have an envelope with your vote that is cryptologically, sort of closed for any external access, except for the voting server that has the key to unlock it. But it can only unlock it without your electronic identity attached. So those two electronic envelopes go to the voting server. The electronic identity is registered and then deleted. So it registers that you did vote, because also you still have the right to vote on paper, which would overwrite your vote. And then after all votes are tabulated, both physically and online, then after they've been tabulated physically, then they would disconnect the digital identity from the digital vote. And then the vote would go to the vote counting server. There are 3 voting servers that are implemented in the system. Sort of one does one part of the process and then the next. And that's how we ensure anonymity. We've got internal and external audits. We've got members of all parties present when the black box server is open. And yeah, of course, we've got international election observers, just like in many other democracies around the world. And the voting source code is also online. Good question. Sorry for the long explanation. Laura says, we are currently in a remote learning for grade school students for social distancing. There was no infrastructure in place before this, so it's been a heavy lift. It is like heaven. And honestly, I mean, having grown up in Germany, I've gone through a very paper-based system myself. And I've seen all the different e-schooling solutions that they have. In Estonia, you've got, as part of this e-school data infrastructure, you have digital sick leaves that only the parents can sign with their electronic ID. So kids can't fake their parents' signatures, which in Estonia has led to a 30% drop in students' absences. What a surprise, yeah. So, and I suspect that the rates will be comparably similar in many other countries around the world. So there's a lot to be done, and don't be too sad. Just make sure that it happens in your country, and I'm doing my best to spread it all over the world as well. That's part of my job. But yeah, any final questions?
Maybe not a final question, but a comment. I will be talking a little bit more about the Digital 9 and the relationship that Estonia has had with other countries in generating some shared practices. Do you have any thoughts on New Zealand, Uruguay, other countries that are doing this, and how the Estonian government or Estonian private enterprise has standardized some of those practices?
Yeah, the truth is the cooperation is not as strong as it could be. Estonian companies are not heavily engaged in those countries. It's rather information and best practice exchange on a national diplomatic level. The work that the briefing center does, that we do, I would say, I might be biased here, does a lot more to actually connect Estonian companies with people and political policymakers from around the world. It's become a bit of a talking shop, in my opinion, but yeah,
that's good to know.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe can I show you something for like 2 more minutes? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yes. So this is true. I did some Googling. I did some research on the DMV the other day because I wanted to know like what are the working processes there. I will share my screen with you so you see what I've come across. So I went on Google. I entered DMV, and instead, sure, California, and instead of clicking on images, instead of clicking on news, I clicked on images. And when you click on images for DMV on Google, you will find lots and lots of queues in front of and inside of buildings. And this became sort of a very nice image for me to understand the American experience, I guess. I want to show you very quickly what the Estonian DMV looks like, just so you get an idea of what you can expect if you want to live here for a year or so. So you go on traffic, you go on this part, and you click on services, and then you go onto the e-services of the road administration. Switch to English. You click on enter, and we log in. This is quite interesting, actually. You can log in also through your bank. Because your bank also uses Smart ID and Mobile ID and the ID card and so on. I'll show you how that works. So I'm not logging into my bank. You're not going to see my bank account. Don't get too excited. Click on Smart ID here. And when I click on log in, then we will get the same control codes again. Oops. 4934, 4934. I will enter my PIN 1. Login successful. And I will give that back to the page and let me enter. Now, immediately it will ask me, in which role do I want to use this service? Do I want to use it as Florian Marcus, private person, or CEO of my own company? Because I, as a private person, might have 0 cars. Because this is true, public transport in Tallinn is free for all registered residents of Tallinn. All buses, trams, trains, and so on are free. So I don't have a car in Estonia. I don't need it. But my company might have 20 cars for my 20 employees. Yeah, that's perfectly possible. And then I could more easily see which car can be used by which employee, how is it insured, how is it taxed, and so on. Now, under vehicle, I can order a license plate online. It will be digitally registered and physically sent to my home address. And they don't ask me for my home address because they're not allowed to, because they're asking the server of the population register. We could do an ownership transfer within 5 minutes, where I give you a digital signature confirming that you gave me the money, and you give me a digital signature confirming that I give you the car, the keys, the papers, and that's it. And then you drive off the yard, and the police will not stop you thinking that you might have just stolen the car because their databases are already up to date. I'm guessing that some of you might have already bought a used car from someone else. That is very rarely an enjoyable experience because you have to trust the other person that everything's okay with the car. Has there ever been an accident? I don't know. Is there any rust underneath? I don't know. I'm not a car expert. You have to see that. Yeah, so that sort of stuff. In Estonia, you don't have to trust anyone because you can enter the license plate of any car, any vehicle registered in Estonia. So you can say, this is not my car. This is just one that is a very good, for example. We have a Peugeot 306. It was first registered in 1995. It is red. It is an open deck, which is Estonian English for convertible. It has a petrol engine. It has a mileage of around 197,000 kilometers. And most importantly, we can see every single time that this car has been to a technical inspection ever since it was registered in Estonia. So you see, has there ever been a problem with this car? And you can see in 2016, with the lighting, this is in Estonian, of course, the brake lights were burning the entire time. They were on the entire time, which can be a bit confusing if you're the car behind because you don't know if they're braking or not. And for that reason and one other, the car failed the inspection, and then you have 1 month to fix your car and get a replacement inspection done. So before you buy any car, you know, number one, should you buy it at all? Number two, is it worth the money that they're asking for? And all of the different portals and all of the different aspects of life, whether it's about education or health or anything like that, you will have user-friendly services just like that. So I just wanted to give you an insight into one of the portals to get a taster.
I have a question regarding some of the comments you made.
Sorry, that's a bit quiet. Wait, I'll just, yeah.
I'm sorry, is that better?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, those headphones, I apologize. I have a question, or actually a few questions regarding education.
Yeah.
You've made some comments that were really interesting. First, you know, you mentioned that folks or kids are automatically registered for school. And unfortunately, here in the US, we have some parents that choose not to send their kids to school out of neglect and abuse. And I'm wondering if, because in Estonia, kids are automatically registered, if that is a problem that's eliminated entirely, and if it's become really easy to track which kids are getting overlooked, so to speak. In addition to that, you mentioned that it's very easy to transition to an online format of learning, and it's very difficult to, I guess, ditch or bake a sick note. And I'm just wondering if things like that allow kids who are struggling in school or maybe being bullied in school to transition to an online format, and maybe if that has led to a lower dropout rate. And then at the beginning of the presentation, you also mentioned that, and forgive me if I heard you wrong, that college is free in Estonia. Is that correct?
Yeah. But that's in the case in most of Europe, yeah.
I'm just wondering if you've seen, compared to like the US where it's not free, a higher rate of people continuing their education.
I would want to check the statistics on that, but my impression and my intuition would say that yes, higher education is much more prevalent in Europe overall than it is in the US. Because there's the barrier is way lower in Europe, and even if it was comparably similar, the burden, financially speaking, that has to be borne primarily by those of lower socioeconomic standing, is something that I would commit suicide if I would know that I have 40,000 euros in debt. We don't, I mean, of course we have indebted people in Europe, but it's not, in the US, you're expected to go into debt. That's like a default expectation, basically, for many people. And I would say that at the very least, it increases the life quality already based on that. About your first question, so I believe you were referring to the proactive government service where we start sort of registering your kid for school 6 years into the future. That is still in the works. So technically right now kids are not registered for school automatically, but of course all kids still have a personal code, and the government knows how old they are when they enter school readiness age. So social services still have an indication of where the kids live that are not registered for a school yet, and can target those more directly. Yes, that is true. The second question was dropout rates?
Yeah, in regards to the dropout rate.
Again, I don't want to tell you, yeah, everything is dandy in Estonia. We still have dropouts, but as the case in the rest of the world, that might be an issue with Western education as well. So just the way it is being structured these days, and has been for the last centuries. I would say that it's easier to follow up on kids that have issues with learning or with the social environment. I think it's too early to say how the online environment has affected the school environment for kids in particular, because we've had it for, I mean, the entire online environment we've had for the last few months, that people actually do everything online. But we also, many startups in Estonia are working with education technology, edtech startups that focus on mental well-being in school, that are working on gamifying maths and so on, so that there's more of a competitive friendly spirit rather than a sort of man-eat-man approach. Yeah, good questions.
I'm going to interject here. I'm getting messages that some people have to
no worries
all get to work. Florian, your generosity is truly appreciated. You have been you've gone above and beyond what we were hoping for, and I am personally grateful for your time. And as I'm preparing a response to you, just a formal thank you, I just want, on behalf of the EMBA program, to thank you very much, and to let you know that I hope this is the beginning of a conversation that we can continue to have. Part of my teaching module treats New Mexico as an emerging economy and not just the 50th state. And so in that context, I think there's a lot more shared communication that we'll have, and I'll make sure to keep you apprised of some of the developments that occur so that we can keep communicating.
That sounds exciting, yeah. Thank you so much for the time. Thank you for your attention and your great questions. If you do have any questions, I'm sure that Professor Montoya will be happy to forward you my email address. Just in case, it is florian.marcus@eas.ee. So you can always write me your questions that I weren't able to reply to today. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, for the invitation, and have a wonderful day. You're just about to start, so and then enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Much appreciated.
Bye-bye.